So we are on Chesamad Bays 8b toward the bottom. And we began with the Mishnah, which gave an overview of the idea that the Sotah proceeding is measure for measure to her behavior. And then the Gemara went on to say that even though capital punishment no longer exists from the court, but from Hashem it does, and should Hashem decide that a person is worthy of capital punishment, Hashem will have his ways to enforce that. We then went on to say that Rabbi quoted a verse, with the Sa, he'll send his affliction. And Sa is a measure, meaning to say the measure the person used, that's the measure used, the Sa, I think I pronounced it correctly, with the measure the person used in his misbehavior, that's the measure that Hashem sends in punishment, in retribution. And then we went on to say two other verses which describe even smaller amounts. And then one other verse that describes even smaller amount, Kikol Soin V'Soin B'Rash. And then finally the verse, Achas La'achas Numtzeh Cheshbon, that each small sin, combines to a greater measure. That's where we left off. Now this Mishnaic text continues, the third line from the bottom of the page. We indeed find this principle with respect to the Sotah. Where there it is, Shemida Shemadada, at the measure by which she behaved, Bamadadullah, that's the measure by which she was, that's the measure by which the proceeding is done to her. And here this Mishnaic text gets into more specifics than the Mishnah. Our Mishnah was broad strokes in terms of describing her behavior and the proceeding as a counteraction. And this Mishnaic age text is going to be more specific. Namely, he amdal Pesach Beisa, she stood at the door of her home, Leroy Sloy, to show herself to that guy. She stood at the doorway, looking out for him. Therefore, the Kohen puts her at the door, at the Nikanor gate. Measure. She was at the door, she's now at the door again. But this time, instead of her showing off her beauty at the door, now her shame is shown to everybody. So it's measure for measure. She showed her beauty, now her shame is being shown at the door. He parcelized sudden Aresha. She put on nice draperies, sudden like shawls on her head to make herself more appealing to him, this other guy. Therefore, Kohen Naitel Kipa Malresha, therefore the Kohen removes the scarf that's on her head. And she places it below, and he places the scarf below her feet. Further, he kashtalapaneha, she put makeup on her face to try to allure this other guy. Lafichach, therefore, top of page, Testament Aleph, line A. Therefore, Panambarikas, her face becomes like sunken in, and her eyes bulge. Later, we're going to learn that that's one of the effects of the Sotah water. And likewise, he called Chalayina. We said that her face gets sunken and her eyes start to bulge. So she called Chalayina means like she put like mascara. I think it is like the eyeshadow, whatever it is, eyeliner, makeup on the eye. Therefore, her eyes start to bulge. He called Saida. She braided her hair, trying to make herself look more attractive. Therefore, therefore the Kohen undoes her hair. She pointed with a finger. She used her finger like to a kind of seductive manner to allure, to draw in this guy. Therefore, her nails fall out. He chagra b'tziltzul, she put on beautiful bracelets, necklaces, chains. Therefore, kohen maybe chevel mitzri. Therefore, the kohen brings this thick Egyptian wool, this thick Egyptian rope, used to tie her clothing above her chest. And again, it's measure for measure because she put on beautiful jewelry. So now she's adorned with the opposite.
That's where it was ripped, right?
Yes, where her clothing is ripped, they use that thick rope to hold it together so it doesn't fall down. He pashtaloi. Esirecha, she spread her thighs for him. Therefore, Yerecha nefeles, therefore her thighs give out. He kibalte al kresa, she took him onto her stomach, onto her abdomen, right, lying on top of her. Therefore her stomach implodes. She treated him with all kinds of delicacies to give him a good time. Therefore, karbana, her offering, is Michael Behema, is made of barley, which is animal fodder. Usually, most not all, but most karbanas are wheat, achita. There's a few that are sa'ira, that are barley, animal fodder, and this is one of them. He hashkasu yai meshubach. She gave him beautiful wine, the kaises meshubachim, in beautiful glass, in beautiful cups. Therefore, kayin mashka mayim mahmarim. Therefore, the kayin gives her to drink bitter water. Mekeda shel chedesh, in a cheap cup made of earthenware, clay. He also saw she behaved privately. So Yoshe b'seisel elyon, the one who sits in secret on high, God who is concealed, she tried to conceal herself. So Hashem, who himself is concealed and thus sees everything, Samba upon him, directs his attention at her. Shenemar, as the verse reads, the ayin noyev shamra neshef lemar leitishoni ayin, and the eye of the lewd one guards himself in the evening, saying, no one's going to see me. But the verse continues, Seiser Panam Yasin, the one whose face is hidden, he pays attention. Yeah, that's it's one of the greatest defenses. Person does a sin privately, as if no one sees me, so it's no big deal. So it's an offense to Hashem. Hashem doesn't see you when you're hiding. If a person said, "Look, I can't control myself, so I'm doing it anyway, even though I can't control myself." Okay, that's one thing. But then a person comes along and says, I could control myself, but I'm only trying to hide myself from other people. But you're not hiding yourself from God? So it's a kind of bigger offense in some ways. So that's kind of what's happening here. She's hiding herself.
Sorry.
Yeah, what are you saying?
Not true in the sense of damages when a person steals something from a person, you get double, but if you rob a person out in the open, it's a less.
Geneva versus Xela. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Davar Acher, another way of understanding this is not the way we read it now, was she tried to do it in hiding. So the one who's himself is in hiding, God himself, pays attention. Davar Acher, another way of saying this is, he asa b'seiser, she does it in secret. Hamak and person of Agoloi, and the omnipotent, the Hashem who's everywhere, and therefore saw what she did in private, makes it known to all. Because when she dies this horrible death, everybody knows what happened. Shenemar techasa sinna b'masoin tigala ra'asa b'kol. The sinner tries to hide her. Techasa sinna b'masoin. The person does that which Hashem hates and tries to hide it. That person's evil is eventually exposed. This is a theme we've had. I think it was the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Maybe it was in Yuma. We've had this theme for sure in the Gemara. This idea that everything gets out eventually. You can't hide forever. It eventually gets out. There's no such thing as something that just nobody ever knows ever. It's just not the way life is. Eventually, it'll be exposed. Yeah. Okay. Age text, which as I mentioned before, began with these 3 verses. That with the saw, Hashem sends his affliction. That's the one verse. The other verse was Ki kol sa'oin soyin berash, that each and every measure is measured out. And then the other one was achas la'achas. Where's the other verse? No, it's the previous page. It's not here. The other verse, last verse was. Where am I? Oh, here it is. Achas la'achas, one by one, they come to a great number. Those are the three verses that were quoted. And then afterwards, the Mishnah went on to say that we find this idea by the Sotah. And we listed all the various different negative elements of the Sotah and how it's counteracted by the process of the Sotah. Now the Gemara does an analysis of this Mishnah, of this Mishnaic age text, beginning with the need for all these three verses. So therefore the Gemara says, now once you've come to that final verse which says one by one reaches to a great number, one by one reaches a great number, then why would you need the next verse which says by measure it's given out? You've already said one by one. In other words, once you go to this lowest common denominator, why do you need the higher ones? Right? Once you've already made the point that no matter how small it is, it's responded to measure for measure, then you don't need the greater numbers, because the three verses get progressively smaller numbers. It starts with a saw, which is a greater number, sa'oin is smaller, and then achas lachas one by one is even smaller, where there it's called proto, even every tiny amount. So once you've already proved from the verse that the smallest amount is counted and Hashem responds in kind, why do you need verses that talk about greater numbers? It's a fairly simple question. That's the Gemara asks, considering that you've already come to the conclusion that each and every one is counted by this verse, which says one by one is counted, why do you need the next verse, which gives a little bit of a bigger number, little bit of a bigger measure? Lamali, why do you need this verse? It says the Gemara, likim nida, not just for the measure, but also for the type of measure. Meaning like this is what it seems, this is my understanding from Rashi. Qualitative versus quantitative, exactly. As opposed to just quantitative. You sin so much, punishment is so much, but also qualitative. This was the type of sin, and this is the type of punishment. And the first, the verse that has the smallest measure just says one, doesn't say a type of measure. Whereas the next verse, Kikol Soyon, that's an actual measure. And therefore tells you the type also, not just the amount.
So greater is synonymous with greater sin.
So I'll give an example. Explain what this means. So like if we use the model we've used before, that reward and punishment is the result of one's negative behavior. Right. So let's say there's a sin of eating not kosher. For this person eating not kosher, because of his circumstances, Hashem is going to have to give him X amount of time in purgatory after life after death. Let's just say, for whatever reason, that's hypothetical. Hopefully, no one has to suffer, but let's just say hypothetical. Now, that measure of punishment or that measure of pain can be done in two ways. It could be what's referred to as the hell of fire, or it could be the hell of ice. What would be the difference? If the person did it a crime of passion, he's angry at Hashem, as it were, God forbid, and decides, that's it, I'm eating this thing just to prove it. So there was a fire in his sin. So it's not just the kind of sin, but the type, but it's not just how much he sinned, but also the way in which he did. So the result is, when you experience that negativity in hell, the negativity the person experiences is also the manner in which he sinned. So we'll experience this heated passion that's against Hashem. That's metaphorically a hell of fire.
Oh, so it's the state of mind or the...
All of it, that's correct. The state of mind, the way, the intent, the sin itself, the type of sin, and so on.
So the sin is the same sin, you just take it on a different state of mind.
Correct. So it's correct. So not just, look what Rashi says here.
Someone may feel guilty about eating
Me'ein
something.
hachet,
Hungry.
similar to the sin. So,
He's hungry. That's all he has to eat.
so then that's
One
right.
level, but it's, I don't care.
Or-
I'm just gonna eat this.
So there's passionate sin, and then there's cold sin, where a person says, I don't care. I just don't care for him. You know, there's one type of sin, a person says, I can't hold myself and I'm starving. It's one thing. The person feels guilty about it while he's doing it. Right? Somebody else does it, crime of passion. He's upset at God and he wants to prove a point. And then there's someone who just says, I just don't care. It's cold. So each type of sin, because reward and punishment, as we described, is just to re-experience the truth of what a person has done, then the truth of what this person has done is this passionate detachment from Hashem. It's a very burning sense of disconnect from Hashem. It's very painful in that sense. A person who disconnects from Hashem in this cold kind of fashion, which is I just don't care. Then that's the kind of sensation he'll get in experiencing the truth of what it means to wantonly disconnect from Hashem, and so on and so forth. So it's not just the amount, which is implied by the verse achas, one by one, but also the type, which is implied by the verse ki kol sayon. Okay, but now there's the third verse.
There's a spectrum in between those two.
Well, yes. Once we identify that depends on the type of sin, and also your intent and your mode and your intent and your attitude and so on. So yeah, there's a very broad spectrum, right? Which is why the Rambam rules, Kel Deus Hashem, God is the God of knowledge, and only He knows what sin is valued against what for who. It's not as if there's a universal standard. And even when you do find in our sages universal standards that such and such sin cost X and X amount of years, that's the official price tag. Right, but Hashem is the one who makes these prices. And because He knows who you are, the price tag changes.
That's the suggested retail price.
Suggested retail price, yeah, but it's a way of telling. I'll tell you what it is. It's a way of telling you. You want to know how bad this sin is. The sin is so bad that it's worthy of that punishment. Now, whether Hashem's actually going to give it to you, Hashem's decision. But it tells you the value of what you're looking at. Right, that's what punishment. Any description of punishment or reward does. It's not like an absolute standard that this is what for sure Hashem's going to give you as a result or take away as a result. Hashem decides on His own.
You mentioned this once before about violating God forbid Shabbos.
I've used this example about
you're liable for the punishment of death.
But in reality, we're not going to give it to you. Exactly. It's the same thing as.
That's how important it is for Hashem.
That's the same thing as a human court. Hashem says Shabbos is death because Hashem wants you to know that's how bad Shabbos, that's how important Shabbos is. Now, in reality, we don't want anybody to die, so the court is set up in such a way that it's very difficult for someone to get capital punishment. And the same thing is true of Hashem's punishments in heaven. It's not an absolute standard, but when you read about these standards, it's not because it means that that's what's actually going to happen to you. Maybe yes, maybe no. I have no idea. I'm not God's lawyer, nor am I His accountant. I don't want that job. But what it does mean is that this is how important it is to Hashem. It's so important that Hashem is willing to punish a Yid on such and such a level. And we have to remember that if punishment is painful to us, it's equally, if not more painful to Hashem. Hashem does not sit with His arms folded back and saying, you deserve it, you suffer, and that's the end of it. That's not the God Jews believe in. The God we believe in is empathetic. It's more akin to a parent who is aching, watching their kid in pain at the dentist and telling the kid, look, I tried telling you that if you eat too much candy, it's going to hurt you. It's not as if the parent stands there folded arms saying, you see, that's what you deserve for eating candy. That's not how a parent treats a child. Even as the parent is forcing the child to go through this pain, the parent itself is in pain. And in some ways, the parent might even hurt more than the child because the parent really feels how bad it is for the child that is stuck with this cavities and all that stuff. So that's the way Hashem is with us. It's not as if you shouldn't think of, it's a borrowed image from some of our neighboring religions where Hashem has His arms folded and says, you suffer because you're terrible. That's not the way it is. Anyway, all to say, so the first verse which said achas one by one just tells you the number. But then this next verse which says kikol sayon, that tells you the type also, not just the number. Not just the quality, not just the quantity. Now we have the third verse, which was the first verse, right? The verse with the highest number, with the highest measure. Considering that we've already established from this second verse that it's not just the number, like the first verse, but we've established it's also the quality, the type. So why do I need this final verse, which says that with the saw, which is the greatest of all those measures, Hashem sends his retribution. So what do I need that verse for? Everything seems to be covered, qualitative and quantitative. So says the Gemara, look at Rav Chanina bar Papa. That verse comes to substantiate the claim made by Rav Chanina son of Papa. Amar Rav Chanina bar Papa. Rav Chanina son of Papa said, "Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu different min ha'umah." Hashem only does our retribution to the nation, not the Jewish nation, but other nations. Ad shas shilucha, only when he's going to completely destroy them. That is to say, as we're going to learn, as we're going to see soon, when it comes to the Jewish people, Hashem, God forbid, promises he's never going to destroy them. So even as Jews are go through a cleansing or a punishment, if you want to call it that, it doesn't reach the point of, God forbid, complete annihilation. But for other nations, it will happen. There are nations that have been around many years ago and are not around anymore. And when they're on their way out, that's when Hashem punishes them. But until that point, they might live very, very well. That's the point. And this is what's derived from this verse. When he's shalcha, when he sends them out, that's when he sends his retribution in measure. B'shalcha specifically. So I mean, the simple reading of the verse was when God sends b'shalcha terivena, when he sends his affliction. But now he's saying b'shalcha, when he sends them out, when he gets rid of them, then terivena, then he gives them their punishment. So they get their punishment all at the end as they're being removed. In other words, once a nation has fulfilled its purpose in this world, so they get all their justice, and then done, they're over. Finished. The Jewish people's purpose on this world never ends. So we may have to go through cleansings here and there. And we may experience things that we do not understand, and Hashem has his plans, and we have no idea what they are. But the such thing as a Jew comes to an end. Because the Jewish people have always had their purpose. That's the ultimate purpose for everything. But there are other nations that come, they have a certain purpose, and then once the purpose is done, it's finished. And when they're finished, that's when Hashem does his justice with them. This is Rav Chanina bar Papa's statement, which derives from this verse, when he sends them b'shalcha, then to Rivena, then he gives them their due. Okay, we're going to stop over here because the Gemara is going to raise an objection to this, and going through that objection is going to might take a little bit of time. So God willing, we'll get to that tomorrow. Have a wonderful day, everybody.